In this session of environmental law, we'll try to look into the concept of sustainable development, meaning and scope, a concept which is not a new concept for you because we have been dealing with it, we have been talking about it, and have discussed a lot many times in our previous sessions. And we'll also look into the principles that we have discussed earlier, also the principles of sustainable development, focusing majorly on their meaning, purpose, significance of the principles like polluter pays principle, precautionary principle, and public trust doctrine. In this session of environmental law, we'll learn about the concept of sustainable development, meaning and scope, and the certain principles of certain sustainable development, their meaning, purpose, and significance. Like we'll be focusing majorly on polluter pays principle, precautionary principle, and public trust doctrine. The concept of sustainable development refers to a model of human development in which resources are used and they're aimed to use as in order to meet the human needs while preserving the environment, so that these needs can be met not only in the present generation but for also for the generations to come. So, if you look into the process of sustainable development, it refers to the kind of development which can be sustained for generations. It means, and it aims at improving the quality of human life while at the same time living in harmony with nature and maintaining the carrying capacity of the life supporting ecosystem. It refers to the concept of development increasingly, which is based on increasingly society's ability to meet human needs. Economic growth is an important component, as you all are aware of, but it cannot be the goal. The ultimate goal in itself, and the real aim must be to improve the quality of human existence, to ensure people that humans are able to enjoy a long and healthy and fulfilling life, for which sustainable development focuses at the integration of development and environmental imperatives. It modifies the previously unqualified development concept. To be sustainable, development must possess both economic and ecological sustainability. The concept of sustainable development, hence, indicates the way in which development planning should be approached. The term sustainable development, which has been coined by World Commission on Environment and Development, popularly known as Brundtland Commission, in its report Our Common Future, the report defined the term sustainable development as the development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of the future generation to meet their own needs. When we look at the above definition, it contains two key features: the concept of the essential needs of the present generation and the idea of limitation imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet the present and future needs. The Commission, in its report, further stated that the sustainable development is not a fixed state of harmony, but rather a process of change in which exploitation of resources, the direction of investment, the orientation of technological development, and institutional change are made consistent with future as well as present need. It altered the world to the urgency of making progress towards economic development that could be sustained without depleting natural resources or harming the environment. The report also suggested that the social equity, economic growth, environmental maintenance are simultaneously possible, and that each nation is capable of achieving its full economic potential at the same time enhancing its resource base. However, it recognized that achieving this equity and sustainable development would require technological and social change. So if you look at the concept of sustainable development, it involves multifaceted approaches, like it involves economic, human, environmental, and technological aspects. It is hence a process which seeks to bring improvement in the quality of human life along with conservation of ecological system. Thus development and environment both are interdependent, and therefore we understand that there cannot be development without protection of environment, nor there can be conservation of environment without development. The term sustainable, which was being coined by the World Commission on Environment and Development, uh, which is popularly known as Brundtland Commission in its report "A Common Future." It lays its emphasis on achieving certain objectives. The principle of sustainable development seeks to achieve the following objectives. First, to maintain production of goods and services for development and efficiency. Second, conservation and management of natural resources, including preservation of biodiversity and maintenance of biological integrity. Third, maintenance and enhancement of the quality of life, adopting the principles of equitable distribution of wealth and material resources. If you look at the objective of sustainable development, it focuses on maintenance of production of goods and services for development and efficiency, conservation and management of natural resources, including preservation of biodiversity and maintenance of biological integrity, and maintenance and enhancement of the quality of life by adopting the principle of equitable distribution of wealth and material resources. Now we shall look into the principles of sustainable development, which are intergenerational equity, which talks about intergenerational fairness, mandates the present generation to not to look at the resources of the earth mere as investment opportunity, but as a trust which has been passed on to them by their ancestors and needs to be enjoyed in a manner that it further gets passed on for the future generational use. Now the next one is use and conservation of natural resources, which is also consisted as is known as intergenerational equity, where the equitable usage of natural resources has been focused at. It says that the underlines a condition precedent to achieve intergenerational equity, and the main problem of intergenerational equity must be approached in the light of different economic, environmental, and cultural political circumstances prevailing within and between the countries. Environmental protection principle environmental protection talks about not only management of resources to sustain the present needs, but also to manage them in a manner that we protect them, conserve them in a manner that the needs of the future generation can also be met. The precautionary principle with which on which we will be speaking about in our next slides, polluter based principle, is the one which lays down the boundage on the polluter to pay for the damage that is being caused by their action. Principle of liability to help incorporate other poverty eradication. We will be are the principles which focuses on the ability of the present generation to the ability and responsibility of the present generation to help and cooperate with each other in order to sustain and maintain the environmental balance and develop in a manner that it does not hampers economic growth, and also balances out the relationship between the development and environmental protection. Public principle of public trust. This we will be again discussing in our next slides. Polluter pays principle. The principle is commonly interpreted to mean that the polluter who has directly or indirectly damaged the environment or created conditions that led to environmental damage should bear the cost of carrying out the measures decided by public authorities to ensure the environment is returned to an acceptable state after a pollution incident of pollution, and it focuses on the liability of the polluter. The one who pollutes has to ensure the balance is being restored. And also it focuses that the polluter pays it focuses that the cost associated with the pollution are to be paid by the polluters and not by the government or the society. If we look into the basic the principle, the basic objective of the principle, it says that the polluter should internalize the cost of pollution, control it as its source and pay for its effect, including remedial or cleanup cost, rather than force other states or future generation to bear such cost. Further, if we look at Principle 16 of Rio Declaration proclaims that The national authority should endeavor to promote the internalization of environmental cost, the use of economic instrument taking into account approach that the polluters should in principle bear the cost of pollution with due regard to the public interest and without distorting international trade and investment. This real declaration we have already discussed in our previous sessions. If we look at the objective of the principle, it demands that the financial cost of preventing or remedying damage caused by pollution lie within with the undertaking which causes the pollution under it. So it's not the role of the government to meet the cost involved in either prevention of such damage or in carrying out remedial action, because the effect of it would be to shift the financial burden of the pollution incident to the taxpayer. So finally, we can understand by this principle that polluter pays principle provides the producers of goods or other item that they should bear in their minds that financial and practical responsibility that they have while of preventing or remedying any pollution caused by their activities. This includes all the environmental cost as well as direct cost to people or property. It also extends to costs incurred in avoiding pollution and not just those related to remedying the damage. Hence, the responsibility encompasses or it involves all the environmental costs and not just those that are immediately tangible. And the nature and extent of cost and circumstances in which the principle will apply will differ depending upon the nature of each circumstance and nature of cases. As we have seen with polluter pays principle, which says that there is a which levies twofold liability on the polluter, that is to provide compensation to the victims of pollution and also maintain and restore back the ecological balance. The next principle that we will be discussing is precautionary principle, which is a rule of evidence which deals with burden of proof in environmental law cases, and it's a very important principle. It precautionary principle, it seeks to ensure that a substance or human activity which may cause a threat to environment is prevented from causing harm to environment. And even if there is no conclusive scientific proof of linking that particular substance or human activity to environmental damage, thus precautionary principle presupposes that onus of proof is on the industrialist to show that his action is benign and is not harmful to environment. This principle hence shift the burden of proof on the polluter, that individual industry, to prove to that his activity, the process or operation that he's involved with is not hazardous to nature, health, or will not damage the environment, and his actions are environmental friendly. Accordingly, we have to also see the assimilative capacity principle, which says that the principle that environment having a assimilative process, it absorbs itself the shock of pollution, but beyond a certain limit the pollution may cause damage to the environment requiring effects to repair it. Thus, according to the assimilative capacity theory, the role of law will bring only when the limit is crossed. But we need to understand that there was restrictive the scope of this principle is very narrow, and that's why it led to the shift from assimilative capacity to precautionary principle. But the pollution cannot wait for action to be postponed for investigation of its quality, concentration, and boundary. So hence we saw the shift happened from principle of assimilative capacity to precautionary principle, and that we can trace a basic shift that happened in this approach to environmental protection happened initially between 1972 and 1982. Earlier, the concept was based on the assimilative capacity, which we can understand it can be revealed from the rule that was being followed under Principle 6 of Stockholm Declaration of United Nations Conference on Human Environment in 1972. The said principle assumed that the science could provide policymakers with the information and means which are necessary to avoid encroaching upon the capacity of the environment to assimilate impacts. and it presumes that the relevant technical expertise would be enough and sufficient and available when the environmental harm was predicted, and then there would be sufficient time to act in order to avoid such harm. But further, UN General Assembly resolution on World Charter for Nature in 1982 emphasized that the shift to it emphasizes the shift to precautionary principle, and it was reiterated in the Rio conference in 1992 in its Principle 15, which says that in order to protect the environment in the precautionary approach shall be widely applied by state according to their capacities and capabilities. Where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, the lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. So, if finally we can say that this precautionary principle is a principle which ensures that a substance or activity poses a threat to environment is prevented and restricted from adversely affecting it, even if there is no conclusive scientific proof linking that a particular substance or activity led to that environmental damage. The next is principle of public trust or public trust doctrine. The public trust doctrine is based on the notion that the public holds inviolable right in certain lands and resources, and that regardless of the title of ownership, and that the state retains certain rights in such lands and resources in trust for the public. The recognition of public trust doctrine for the protection of natural resource is another judicial innovation of Indian judiciary. The ancient Roman Empire developed a legal theory known as the doctrine of public trust, which was founded in on the ideas that certain common properties such as rivers, seashore, forest, air were held by the government in trusteeship for the free and impeded did use of for the general public. Our contemporary concern about the environmental bears a very close conceptual relationship to this legal doctrine, as we have seen in under we can see under the Roman law. These resources were either owned by no one or by everybody in common. Under English common law, we can trace the origin by seeing that the sovereign could own these resources, but the ownership was limited in nature. The crown could not grant these properties to private owners if the effect was to interfere with the public interest in navigation or fishing. Resources that were suitable for these use were deemed to be held in trust by the crown for the benefit of the public. When we talk about the public trust doctrine and its applicability, we see that the public trust doctrine looks beyond the need of the present generation and also suggests that certain resources are invested with a special purpose, and it would be very necessary to understand that traditionally, though the doctrine of public trust was applied only to protection of access to the common for public benefit, now the doctrine is being applied even to prevent over exploitation of the environment. And now this doctrine is highly used and being used as a legal and planning tool for the fulfillment of sovereign's role as the trustee of environment for future generations.